Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the structure of the Rosh Hashanah davening and the mitzvah blowing of the shofar. Again, this may have been covered in Ohr Somayach. Everything gets covered many, many times, so I apologize for what might be a little redundant. My guess is I'll probably tell you something new in the middle of it. And that is, we know, of course, that there's a mitzvah in the Torah to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. That much we do know. However, all of the davening is rabbinic, meaning there is no mitzvah to say the particular davening that we say. And as you know, we actually blow the shofar in 3 different chunks, 3 different times in the Rosh Hashanah service. We blow it before Musaf, right after the Torah reading, after the Haftorah, before the Musaf davening. We blow the shofar the first time, and then we will blow the shofar in the repetition of the Shmona Esrei, and then we will blow the shofar after the repetition of the Shmona Esrei, and that itself is divided into 2 chunks. Some of it is in the middle of the final Kaddish, and some of it is at the end, after the final Kaddish. So I just want to explain where those 3 sections come from. And they actually are given names. The Teki'ot shofar that we blow before the Musaf go by the term Teki'os demiyushav, the sitting down Teki'os. Why are they called the sitting down Teki'os? L'maisa, we stand up for them, right? We do stand up for them. But they're called the sitting Teki'os simply because since they're not part of a Shmona Esrei, you were allowed to sit down. So if you had to sit down, you could sit down. The Teki'os during Musaf are called Teki'os de Mu'umad, the standing up Teki'os, because they're part of the repetition of the Amida, where Shmona Esrei is a prayer that you say standing up. Now, as far as the Gemara is concerned, when you learn the Gemara, the only thing the Gemara knows is the miyushav and the mu'umad, meaning in the time of the Gemara, if you would be in a shul in the time of the Gemara, there was no shofar blowing after Musaf. That came later. Now, chronologically, the way it works is the following. The Musaf of Rosh Hashanah is a very unique Musaf. It's the most unique Musaf, both days, of the whole year. Because normally every Musaf, whether it's Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed, always has 7 brachos. The first 3 blessings of the regular Amida, the last 3 blessings, and then 1 middle blessing about the holiness of the day. Mekadesh HaShabbos, Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim, Mekadesh Yisrael V'Roshei Chadashim. So it's 7 brachos. The first 3, the last 3, and then the middle bracha that is called Kedushas Hayom, the holiness of the day. Every Musaf, except Rosh Hashanah, has 7 brachos. Even Yom Kippur, which has a long confession. Yom Kippur Musaf is very long because of the Vidui, but it only has 7 brachos. If you count it, you'll see there's only 7 brachos in the Yom Kippur Musaf. The only Musaf that has a different number is the Rosh Hashanah Musaf. The Rosh Hashanah Musaf has 9 brachos. First 3, last 3, but instead of a single bracha of Kedushat Hayom, we actually have 3 middle brachos, right? 4, 5, 6 middle brachos. And they are given specialized names based on their theme. The first of the middle 3 is called Malchuyos, kingship. The second of the 3 is called Zichronos, remembrance. And the third of the 3 is called Shofaros, a discussion about shofar. Malchuyos, Zichronos, and Shofaros. And structurally, each of those 3 brachos, although the brachos are all different, of course, but structurally, each of them follow the same pattern. They start off with a poetic opening, Pesicha. In fact, for Malchios, the poetic opening should be a very, very familiar prayer to you. It is none other than the Aleinu that we say 3 times a day. But originally, Aleinu was not said every day. Originally, Aleinu was Malchios. That's where it is. So it's kind of a funny feeling sometimes. It's such a familiar prayer gets elevated to such a place of prominence in the Rosh Hashanah. So after the psicha, right, so for Malchios, there's a poetic psicha, which is Aleinu. Zichronos has a poetic psicha about God remembering the good deeds of our forefathers. Shofaros has a much shorter psicha, but it's still a poetic psicha about the shofar that was blown at the time of the giving of the Torah. So that's called psicha. Psicha is the poetic opening for Malchios, Zichronos, Shofros. After the psicha, we then go to the recitation of 10 psukim from Tanakh that deal with the theme of the bracha. And the way the 10 psukim work is 3 verses from the Torah, 3 verses from the Kesuvim. So instead of Torah Nevi'im Kesuvim, it's Torah Kesuvim Nevi'im. And the Kesuvim, all of the verses of Kesuvim are from Tehillim. So really it's only one, right? So 3 Torah, 3 Kesuvim, 3 Nevi'im, and the 10th and final verse is from the Torah again. So in Malchios, these will all be 10 verses talking about God as king, as sovereign. In Zichronos, these will be 10 verses talking about God remembering the good deeds of our forefathers, and we hope he'll remember them this day. In the case of Shofros, we have 10 psukim that talk about the different facets of the shofar. The shofar of Matan Torah, the shofar of ingathering of the exiles, the shofar of resurrection of the dead, and the shofar that we blow as a mitzvah. Okay? So, psicha, right? So again, the structure of the bracha is psicha, psukim, and then you have a chasima, you have the conclusion that culminates in a bracha. So in the case of Malchios, the bracha is Melech al kol haaretz, God is the king of the world, Mekadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron, he sanctifies Israel and the day of remembrance. It's interesting that even in Malchios, we refer to Rosh Hashanah as the day of remembrance. Okay. In the case of Zichronos, it's Baruch atah Hashem, Zocher habris. Blessed art you, God, who remembers the covenant. In the case of Shofros, Baruch atah Hashem, Shomea kol truas amo Yisrael barachamim. You listen to the shofar blowing of the people of Israel with rachamim. Okay, so you understand how it works. 3 parts: psicha, pesukim, chasima. We do it for Malchios, we do it for Zichronos, we do it for Shofros. If you are interested in a more in-depth analysis of this, I will just alert you that the symmetry of 3 Torah, 3 Kesuvim, 3 Nevi'im, final Torah, works perfect in the case of Malchios and Zichronos. It seems to get a little messed up in Shofaros, where there seems to be some extra verses there that don't belong. So it might be worthwhile to you to sit down with the machzor and I literally count the verses and see if you can make the count fit. In Shofaros, it's a little more, I mean, you work it out, but it's actually a little more problematical. Although Shofaros is by far shortest. It's almost as if, I don't want to say that that's the reason, but it's almost as if that they got tired. By the time they got to Shofaros, they're already tired. So Shofaros is really short as compared to Malchios. But in fact, it goes, Malchios is the longest, then Zichronos, and then Shofaros is the shortest. And then we finish the 3 middle blessings, and then we go to the last 3, which say, the regular repetition, together with, of course, Tuchanim, Birchas Kohanim. Now, the way Teki'ot to Mu'umad works is, after Malchios, we blow the shofar. After Zichronos, we blow the shofar. And after Shofaros, we blow the shofar. Okay, so again, the vocabulary here is good to know. Teki'os de miyushav is the blowing of the shofar before Musaf. Teki'os de mu'umad is the blowing of the shofar after Malchios, after Zichronos, after Shofros. Now, I'll get in a few moments to the blowing after Musaf. Remember, in the Gemara, there was no blowing after Musaf. Interestingly enough, chronologically, the mu'umad was before the miyushav, meaning to say, in the time of the Mishnah, they only blew in the Musaf. They didn't blow before Musaf. Because they wanted to kill two birds with one stone. On one hand, there's a mitzvah of shofar, but they wanted to combine the shofar as a way of bringing our prayers to God. So to kind of kill two birds with one stone, the original way we fulfilled the mitzvah of shofar, at least in shul, was only by the mu'umad. So if you would have been in the shul in the time of the Mishnah, let's say you took a time machine back, and you would be very upset. They would go straight from the Haftorah to the Musaf davening, and you would say, "Where's shofar blowing?" Well, they say, "What are you talking about? There's no shofar blowing now. What type of ignoramus are you?" I'm Oretz, right? Because originally, in the time of the Mishnah, people get a little confused here, because when you're learning the Mishnah and certain things are not mentioned, you get confused. Why aren't they mentioned? But the answer is they weren't mentioned because they didn't exist at the time. Miyushav, the earlier ones, is a later innovation, and it primarily was because for women or the elderly who were not able to stay for the long service, so we wanted to be sure they would hear shofar, so we did an extra shofar blowing before. So the original was the mu'umad, and the miyushav was added for zakenim, for cholim, for women that have children they're taking care of, and the like. And that is why it's important that when the Baal Tokeya makes the bracha of the shofar is not only going on the shofar blowing that they're doing then, but it's covering the shofar blowing of Musaf, because that in many ways is the more important mitzvah, and that is the basis of the well-known announcement that one is not supposed to talk. Normally you're not supposed to talk during the repetition of Shemona Esrei anyway, even during the week, but particularly on Rosh Hashanah, because you don't want to interrupt between the bracha and the mitzvah. Okay, so we've explained, so to speak, 2/3. We've explained the miyushav, and we explained the mu'umad. Now, why do we blow shofar after Musaf? So I tell you, I still remember this. I don't know why I didn't notice it when I was younger, but when my first year in Eretz Yisrael, so I was 14 years old, I was in high school, and yeshiva davening is long. And as you know, you hear too, yeshiva davening is long, and so it was pretty tiring, very, very exhausting, very beautiful davening, but a very exhausting davening. So finally, it was over like 2:30, even later than we do here. And I was finally saying, finally Musaf was over, and I was saying, oh, Baruch Hashem, it's over. And then they start blowing the shofar again. I don't know why I didn't know that from other years. I said, oh no, they're starting everything again? I didn't know what they were doing. Right, so sometimes you might have that little bit of sense, you think you're finished, and all of a sudden everything starts again. So let me explain where that comes from. That is not from the Gemara. That is absolutely after the Gemara. In the Gemara, this was not even known. There became a tradition that was developed at some point in time that we want to sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah 100 times. The Torah doesn't require that. The Torah does not require 100 times. But we want to do it 100 times. What is the basis of 100 times? So it's based on the idea that one of the evil non-Jewish kings or generals, actually, that was oppressing us in the book of Judges, Sefer Shoftim, was a man called Sisera. And if you remember, this was the battle that Devorah fought. Devorah was the female judge on behalf of the Jewish people. And women play a very important part in that story. There are two women who play a very important part in that story. There is Devorah, that was the judge and the leader. And there was another woman, Yael, who actually killed Sisera. Right? When Sisera's army was losing the battle, so Sisera ran away, and he sought temporary shelter in the tent of Yael. He thought she would be an ally. And according to Chazal, she even had intercourse with him to kind of entice him This was called a sin l'shem shamayim, a whole sugya about committing a sin in order to entice the enemy. And eventually, she got him drunk on fermented milk. So be careful about that milk that you drink. It can be intoxicating. And as he was in a deep slumber, she took a tent stake and a hammer, and she drove the tent stake through his temples, and he died. And that is commemorated in the Song of Devorah. Devorah had a poetic song glorifying the victory that Hashem gave. Now, in the Song of Devorah, it is recorded, almost sarcastically or cynically, that Sisera's mother is eagerly awaiting the return of her son. But not because she cares about her son, but she says, this is in Devorah's words, what jewelry is he bringing me? What fancy clothing? In other words, she's waiting. I want to see the gifts that he's bringing back from the spoils of war. And Chazal have a tradition that Sisera's mother cried 100 times, 100 sobs. Now, what that means is the following. God has mercy over all human suffering. Sisera's mother, Gaza, Palestinians. And the problem is, though, that if God's suffering is aroused vis-a-vis the enemies, then God forbid we could suffer tremendously. So our shofar, which is a crying sound, we blow the shofar 100 times to counteract. Now again, obviously, we're not referring specifically to Sisera's mother because she's long gone, but it's symbolic, meaning her crying is symbolic of the compassion that God might have towards the enemies of the Jews who suffer. So we need to counteract that compassion by our blowing of the shofar. Now, this is not in the medrash about her crying 100 times, that is in a medrash, but the idea that that's why we blow shofar 100 times, that is not in the medrash. That's not in the Gemara. That's not in the medrash. This developed in the time of Gaonim and maybe even later than the Gaonim, the time of the Rishonim. Now, let's figure out a little mathematics. By the time we finish Musaf, how many times have we blown the shofar? So let's look first at the Miyushav, which is the first one, and then look at the Mu'amad. When we blow the Miyushav, let me just remind you. So we blow, okay, again, I need to be sure everyone knows the abbreviation. I hope you do. I assume that you do. Right? The shofar has 4 different sounds. The Teki'ot is the elongated sound. Shvarim is a longer type of crying. And a trua is the whimpering. And then you do a Teki'ot again. So there are 3 basic shofar sounds. There's the Teki'ot, there's the Shvarim, there's the trua. Okay, because Teki'ot is doubled over. Now, these are given in abbreviation. We simply, in fact, you should learn to use the abbreviation. It's very convenient. It saves you a lot of words. Teki'ot, the first letter of Teki'ot is Taf. The first letter of Shvarim is Shin. Now, since Teruah has the same first letter as Teki'ot, when we abbreviate Trua, we don't use Taf, because then you wouldn't know. We use Resh, the second letter. As a result, therefore, when you blow Teki'ot, Shvarim, Trua, Teki'ot, we call that Tashrat. Taf, Shin, Resh, Taf. When you blow Teki'ot, Shvarim, Teki'ot, it's called Tashat. Okay, following? When you blow Teki'ot, Trua, Teki'ot, that's called Tarat. So now, I hope I can now use these abbreviations. It'll save me on words. So the way Miyushav works is, we blow 3 Tashrats, we then blow 3 Tashats, we then blow 3 Tarats. So how many is that? Well, Tashrat is 4. Teki'ot, Shvarim, Trua, Teki'ot. 4 different sounds. So that's 12, 9, 9. 12, 9, 9 is 30. So the Miyushav is 30. Okay? Now, Mu'umad is also going to be 30, but we do it a little different. Remember, we blow after Malchios, after Zichronos, after Shofars. Now, it turns out, B'sach HaKol, we will be doing 3 Tashrats, 3 Tashats, 3 Tarats, but after Malchios, we do one of each. 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat. After Zichronos, 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat. After Shofaros, 1 Tashrat, 1 Tashat, 1 Tarat. So it's the same 30. In other words, B'sach HaKol, you've done 3 of each. But instead of doing 3 of each and then going to the next one, you do 1 of each. After Malchios, 1 after Zichronos. Now, there is a machlokas. There are other minhagim in terms of how you configure it, but the normal minhag of most kehilos is like we do it here. That'll be in the Art Scroll Siddur, etc. Okay, so now B'sach HaKol, therefore, it turns out that the number of shofar sounds in the miyushav and the mu'umad are exactly the same. So when you finish the repetition, you got 60 shofar sounds. Now, as they say, in the time of the Gemara, that was it. In fact, there was nothing significant in even the number 60. That was simply miyushav and mu'umad. But now that you have a new commitment, that we want to get 100 sounds of the shofar, so we're 40 short. Okay? So now we got to make up 40. So how do we make up the 40? So it's interesting. Again, there are different minhagim. I'm just going to tell you what we do here. And what we do here is the normal minhag Ashkenaz is what we do here. And that is the following. In the middle of the Kaddish, right before the Kaddish is finished, we blow 30. How do we blow 30? The same way as miyushav. 3 tashrats, which is 12. 3 tashats, which is 9. 3 tarats, which is 9. So in the middle of the Kaddish, you blow 30. So now we're up to 90. So we're only missing 10, right? We're missing 10. So after Kaddish, we blow 1 tashrat, which is 4, 1 tashat, which is 3, and 1 tarat, which is 3. 4, 3, 3 is 10. Okay? Ergo, we've come up with the cheshbon of 100 shofar sounds to counteract the crying of Sisra. Again, this is not under the law of the Gemara. This was a later minhag in the time of the Gaonim, or maybe even the Rishonim. And initially it was not universal, meaning, today I believe it's universal. But, there was a time where, there were kehilos in Europe that didn't blow 100 kolos. They didn't necessarily see the point. This was something that spread over time. Now, the idea that we hear shofar 100 times, this presupposes that every kol was kosher and didn't have to be repeated. In point of fact, depending on the Baal Tokeya and also how strict the Rav that's paskening is, you might hear shofar 500 times. If something has to be repeated again and again and again because it didn't meet the halachic definition of a good teki'ah or a trua or the like. So if you're trying to keep a count, how many times has the shofar been blown, usually your number will be higher than 100. But assuming that everything is kosher, so 100 kolos is what we aim for, and that is why we have the 3 chunks of miyushav, mu'umad, and then after Musaf we have 30 kolos within the Kaddish, and then 10 kolos after the Kaddish. Now, let me just mention an alternative minhag that is practiced by many Hasidim and many Sfardim, and that is a prolongation of the Teki'ot de Me'umad in Musaf that we only blow in the repetition of the Amida after Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. But many Hasidim, including Chabad and many Sfardim, they actually blow in the silent Amida as well. Now, what does that even mean? This is a very, very, if you've never experienced, actually I've never experienced it myself, but if you haven't experienced it and you're not aware of this, it can be quite shocking. Because obviously in the silent Shemona Esrei, everybody is at a different place in the davening. I mean, you're not at the same place. So the way it works is the Baal Tokeya, the shofar blower, davens next to the chazan, right? So they kind of daven together. And when the chazan in the silent Shemona Esrei reaches the end of Malchios, you could be before that, you could be after that. Where you are makes no difference. But when the chazan reaches Malchios, all of a sudden you're going to hear, and the Baal Tokeya will start blowing one tashrat, one tashat, one tarat. And then we continue davening. When he reaches Zichronos, whether you're there or not, makes no difference. Blow, one tashrat, one tashat, one tarat. Continue davening when you reach Shofros. Now, that actually means that if you have that minhag of blowing in the silent as well as the repetition, then by the time you finish the repetition, you have heard the shofar 90 times, not 60 times. You've already heard it 90 times. You had the 30 of the miyushav, 30 in the silent, and 30 in the repetition. So all you need in a Chabad Minyan, or a Sephardic Minyan, all you need after Musaf is 10. So all you'll hear after Musaf is one tashrat, which is 4, one tashat, one tarat. Okay? So we got to do 40 because we didn't blow in the silent. But if you blow in the silent, then you only have to do 10. Okay? So again, bottom line is going to be the same. You're going to have 100 shofar sounds. It's simply a question of how you get it. And the purpose of the 100 shofar sounds, once again, is to combat the mercy that might be aroused on behalf of the enemies of Am Yisrael. Now, let me point out, though, that the rule of blowing in either the repetition or the silent only applies when there's a minyan, meaning, obviously, when there's no minyan, there's no repetition anyway. But even if you blow in the silent, not you, but even if the Baal Tokeya blows in the silent, it's only when a minyan is davening. Meaning, if you're davening b'yechidus, the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, Corona or whatever the reason, you do not blow the shofar in the silent. In other words, you have to hear the shofar 30 times. That's mu'umah. In fact, even the halacha of 100 kolos is only b'tzibur. If you're hearing shofar privately, like you're sick or something, so we blow the shofar 30 times. 3 tashrats, 3 tashats, 3 tarats. So you don't do 100 and you don't blow during the Musaf. I remember seeing years ago an elderly man who was a very, very fine man, really a tzaddik, and he was, for some reason, he was davening Musaf after the minyan. He was davening b'yechidus, and he had a shofar in his hand, and he was blowing the shofar when he got to Malchias, Zechonis, and Shofars. Again, he was a big tzaddik, but halachically that was not correct. You do not blow shofar when you're blowing, when you're davening b'yechidus. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Rabbi Dr. Abraham Avram Twersky, great man. There's a chassid, a Talmud Chacham, a very eminent psychiatrist, an expert on addiction, author of, I think more than 100 books and the like, although he always says all of his books are the same book. It's about self-esteem and building yourself up. He manages to get it in everything. But he tells a story in one of his books that he grew up in Milwaukee, and his father was Hasidic Rebbe in Milwaukee. And as Hasidim, they did have the minhag of blowing the shofar in the silent. Now, there's a certain disadvantage there, because in the silent Shemona Esrei, no one's allowed to walk around. So sometimes it happens, Baruch Hashem, I don't think it ever happened here, the Baal Tokeya can no longer blow or he's having too much trouble, so they have to give the shofar to somebody else. So normally, in the repetition or in the miyushav, you just walk over to somebody. But when everybody's in the Amida, what do? So all you can do is, remember, everyone has the talis over their heads. All you can do is like pass the shofar around till somebody gets it who feels they could blow. You can't talk. You can't go over to the next guy and say, you're the guy. So it's almost like a random thing. It gets passed around, and somebody decides they can do it. So Rabbi Twersky said when he was 8 years old, somehow the shofar was being passed around, and he got hold of the shofar, and he decided to blow. Now, and he did a perfect job. Malchios, Zichronos, Shofros, wonderful job. Problem was, of course, that one cannot fulfill the mitzvah by the Teki'ot shofar of a katan below bar mitzvah, because this is a very fundamental rule. The only one that can do a mitzvah for me is somebody that has an obligation. That's why a goy, right? A goy cannot make kiddush for me, even if the guy knows perfect Hebrew, right? It's still a funny feeling for me. Hebrew was a language. In addition to being Lashon HaKodesh, it's a language, and there are non-Jews who speak Hebrew very, very well, just like there are non-Jews who speak Chinese very well. So it's still, though, it's still a little bit, disconcerting when I hear a non-Jew who speaks Hebrew a lot better than I speak Hebrew. It's a truth. I already get that. So, and a non-Jew can certainly physically blow shofar. He could be a musician. Okay? But a non-Jew who blows shofar for you doesn't count, simply because he doesn't have the mitzvah. If he doesn't have the mitzvah, he can't do it. A katan can't blow shofar. A woman cannot blow shofar for her husband. Because technically, although women universally try to hear shofar, but technically women are exempt from shofar, because it's a time-bound positive commandment, and it's not one of the exceptions. So a man can blow for a woman, and a woman can blow for a woman, but a woman cannot blow for a man. So the problem is, Rabbi Twersky was 8 years old. He blew shofar for people, and after davening, everybody wanted to know who was that really wonderful shofar blower, and they were so excited. And it turned out it was an 8-year-old child. And you really can't make it up, because here's the problem. Baruch Hashem, they fulfilled the shofar doraisa with the miyushav. But you can't make up if you miss the shofar during Musaf, because you've already davened Musaf. You can't daven Musaf again. So this was not something you could even make up, you see? So he said that his father's reaction to him was a mixture of extreme pride and extreme annoyance at the same time. They were like two contradictory moods. His father was upset that you should not have taken the shofar. The halacha. But his father was proud that his 8-year-old was able to pull it off. Right? So be sure. In fact, I'll mention another thing. Maybe a trivial detail, but it may be important too. We normally assume that a man, a boy, becomes obligated in commandments when he's bar mitzvah. His 13th birthday. Technically, that actually is, people always ask the question, well, it says you have to be 13 on a day. And some people, that's the halacha, that a person is bar mitzvah when he's 13 on a day. So some people make a mistake and they think that you're not really bar mitzvah until the day after your birthday. That's actually not true, because you have completed 13 years the day before your birthday. So the day of your birthday is the next day after your 13 years. And 13 on a day does not mean 13 on a whole day, but 13 and part of the next day. So your birthday is indeed, your Hebrew birthday, that is. Your Hebrew birthday indeed is your bar mitzvah. But interestingly enough, it is not just age. You are not yet an adult just because you're bar mitzvah. There also have to be some biological signs of puberty, either 2 hairs under the arm or 2 pubic hairs. So technically, if a kid didn't have that puberty development, he would still be a katan. Now, it turns out the following. We assume that most kids have it. And for mitzvot that are only rabbinic, we rely on that assumption. So that's why the kid could read the Torah, the kid could lead services, the kid could read Megillah, because these are all rabbinic laws. Could lead benching. But for any mitzvah that's a Torah law, we have to know that he has the puberty signs. So let's imagine you had a rare case where the only person in the show who could blow shofar is a 13-year-old kid. Okay? So unless you see that he's shaving already, which by definition, you'd have to have some way of checking whether he has the physiological signs for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Because remember, the doraisa of shofar blowing is only day 1. Day 2 is a rabbinic holiday. So day 2, the shofar blowing is midrabanan, so I could rely on the katan, right? So this is the thing that people don't realize. Same thing for Parshat Zohar. Torah reading is normally a rabbinic law. It's rabbinic. So a bar mitzvah boy can learn. But Parshat Zohar is a Torah requirement. So there, once again, you have to have a kid that has gone through the requisite puberty development. Same thing with the girl. In other words, a girl is not automatically obligated in commandments unless she also has certain signs of puberty. So it's interesting that the definition of adulthood in Judaism is both age and a certain stage of physical development, which means theoretically a kid might be a katan even if he's 16 years old, if there's delay, if there's puberty blockers or whatever it is. The person might not be halachically obligated in mitzvahs. You can be a katan even after your bar mitzvah. Okay, anyway, I want to wish everybody a Shana Tova, a good and a sweet year. And may Hashem be makabel all of your tefillos, all of our tefillos, all of the tefillos of Am Yisrael, that we should have a year of shalom and bracha and geula for Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and really for the whole world. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.